Well, thanks a lot, folks. We had, after like a month, we're back. We started our series. You can expect a lot of calls coming in the upcoming months. We will be starting with token customization this month. Some ground rules. We have a survey, which we will be sharing in the midst of the call or at the end of the call. We would love to get your feedback. We use that to schedule your calls. We have a YouTube channel, which you can access at aka.ms/m365pnp/videos. And then you can follow me on LinkedIn at Nandeesh Swami. And then our Twitter handles, Microsoft 365 Dev and Azure AD. Please follow them to get updates on your product, as well as any calls or events that we'll be doing in future. Let's stay respectful. This is not a support channel, so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put it in the chat window. We'll be happy to take it on. The next call is going to be on July 20th, which is going to be the third Thursday of the month. All right, perfect. We are recording this call, so in case you would want to be not part of the call, feel free to drop, but then we will be recording and posting this on our YouTube channel. All right, with that said, Kyle, take it away.
Okay, so we're going to revisit the topic of token customization. So just the title there. It's actually something we've talked about a few times, but the nice thing here is that we have been adding new capabilities and new functionality here. So I did want to re-examine or take another look at our token customization capabilities. The first question, of course, is why would I want to customize a token? The token is the primary transaction a developer has with Azure AD. Your application asks for a token to find out who the user is, an ID token in that case. Or you might want to call an API that's protected by Azure AD, and you need that authorization, in which case you need an access token to be authorized to access a resource API. Another option, of course, is there are occasions where there's information you want to know, but you don't want to go ahead and learn whatever particular system the identity provider has to gather that information. So, for example, if I'm an ISV and I'm doing a purely standards-based approach for my implementation on OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect, I might want to say, well, I need some information about the user in the token, so I don't have to go off and learn how else I might find that information. Now, we have two different places we do token customizations. I see I haven't changed the title of this slide correctly. We actually are replacing our old claims mapping. It's still there, it still works, but we're moving toward a claims issuance policy instead. They're very similar, except that the claims issuance policy does have a nice UI editor that we're going to look at a little bit later. But in the same way that we have application registrations, which a developer can use to register an app that might work in any tenant for any customer, and we have enterprise apps or service principals, which are instantiated in each tenant in which the application is allowed to authenticate a user or to run. This allows us to have very custom information that's targeted to a specific tenant. We have a similar capability here in the token customization as well. So I can use optional claims on the application registration if I want to have something that would work no matter which tenant I'm running in, or generically work across all of the different places my app might run, because optional claims are tied to the application registration. We have a new claims issuance policy, and that allows a very custom manipulation of the claims and customization of the claims for a specific tenant. And it's really intended there. So, for example, supposing you wanted to see a claim in your tokens that said division name. Well, that's not a standard property that we have in Azure AD, but you could create such a thing with a token issuance policy saying, well, I want to have a claim named division name, and the data is going to come from extension attribute 7 or 6 or whatever it might be in my tenant. Obviously, each tenant would have their own way of filling or figuring out what that division name, where it would come from. So those are very tenant-specific token customizations, and we do that through our token issuance policy. One really nice thing coming that's just entering our preview now is through a claims issuance policy, I can configure a custom claim provider. So this is an ability to reach out outside of Azure AD in order to get values you want to see in your token as claims. So it's a new capability that we are just putting into preview, but it will allow you as a token provider, someone who's going to need a token rather, to get an augmented token with additional information that's not sourced just from Azure AD itself. Now, there are two different types of tokens, and you can customize either one. In fact, there are no different rules for customizing an access token versus an ID token. All of the capabilities and all of the functionality work in either case for either token. But you need to be aware of which token you should be customizing based on the scenario of your application. ID tokens are issued to client applications so that they can identify the user and maybe learn some additional attributes about the user. They're not used to call APIs. They're only targeted at that one client application. And if I am a client application that is not providing a resource, in other words, I don't provide an API, then I would customize the ID token because that's the token I own. The audience claim will be my client ID. So that's my token. If I provide an API, so I've implemented a resource API of some description, and therefore my API is going to get access tokens from those client applications, then I would customize my access token because I don't get an ID token at all. I really only get access tokens from those client applications, and I customize the access tokens. What doesn't work is for a client application to customize an access token. Yes, client applications are issued access tokens that they then pass on to the calling application, but you cannot customize that. That token belongs to the implementing resource API. So they can customize their token, but you can't customize a token simply because it's going to pass through your application. So if you're a client application, make sure you're customizing ID tokens. If you're an API, make sure you're customizing your access tokens. All right, so let's start with something simple. And we're going to add some optional claims. That's kind of our easiest point here. So let me sign out of this. Actually, let's go back here. I want to sign back in here. And I deliberately signing out of this user so we get a fresh batch of tokens each time. Here's a standard ID token. So we're just going to use a little client application here. So we're just going to customize our ID tokens, but it could have been an access token if we've implemented an API. So these are the standard claims that you find in an ID token that has had no customizations. So this is my audience claim. This is going to be my application client ID. I have the issuer, which is always an Azure AD in this case. I have the time frames in which this token is valid. I have my object ID, which is a great thing to key data off of if I'm going to associate data with this particular user. If I want to be very privacy focused, I would use the subject claim instead to associate data with this user, because the subject claim can't be used to go back and find out that this data I've stored is actually data associated with Alex here, because the subject claim is a one-way key. And then, of course, my tenant ID. So this is the standard set of claims. Let's go ahead and sign out of here, and we'll go over to our application registration for this little app. And I'm going to go here to token configuration. And this is where I can, as a developer, ask for different claims in my token, and it would work no matter where the application is running. It's not tenant-specific information. So the first thing is, let's go to optional claims. These are kind of the easiest one to add. Again, I have to think, am I an application or am I an API? If I'm an application like this one is, I'm going to customize my ID token. If I was an API, I'd do my access token. And now what we've gone through here is I can simply just pick what claims do I want to see in my token. Maybe I want to find out this user's IP address. Or a really handy customization here is to get the login hint. The login hint is great because if I do want to come back and log in again, or if I want to log the user out, or if I want to share with another application that's going to sign in, hey, which user should you be signing in on behalf of? This login hint is a great thing to use. I can find out things like when does the password expire, where would the user go to update their password, etc. And I can even do something like, say, find out some information from whether this user is coming from on-premise and what their security identifier is. Okay, so it's really just a pick 'em. I can pick any of these things and customize the token that way. So now I would expect these claims in my token. Let's do another thing while we're here. We have a very special format just for adding group claims. Group claims are often looked at as, hey, I want to do an authorization decision, and I want to base it based on the user's, what groups the user is a member of. So let's start with our default one here. We have security groups. This is everything except the ones, the groups that Office uses. So if I have a regular security group, I can ask for those. I can also ask for the directory roles, which we treat as groups, but really there are roles that this user is assigned in Azure AD. So for example, I might be a tenant admin, or I might be a user administrator or a groups administrator. If I wanted to only expose capabilities to people who are group administrators, I would ask for the directory roles to be in my token. I can also ask for all groups, which will say the security groups, the directory roles, as well as any Office-based groups, distribution lists, for example. So I'm in a group in Teams, or I'm on an email alias list. If I want any possible group that this user is a member of, and this will include, by the way, nested groups. So any groups I'm a member of and any nested groups that I'm a member of will be part of that token now. So that's a standard set of easy ways, if you will. Oh, I should mention, when I do my groups, I do have the opportunity, and I can do this here, to ask for something other than the group ID. In Azure AD, only the group ID is actually unique. So if you're really going to write some code and you need a unique identifier for the group, you have to use the group ID, especially if it's a cloud-based group. However, maybe your groups are coming from on-premise and you've got some code already that's looking for a group name. You can ask for the group name to be from an on-premise group to be showing up as a name in various formats. In fact, if I take one of those names, I can even have it show up as the roles claim. All of this is to make it a little easier to port on-premise applications to the cloud. So let's go ahead here, and we won't do any changes here. Let's go back to our application and sign in again. And for those folks who are asking, this is just my little best practices app. Oh, I see. Thanks, Bogdan, for dropping the link to it. So you guys can use this if you'd like as well. So I'll go ahead and sign Alex back in again. And now I get a customized ID token. So in this case, these are all standard claims so far, the audience, the issuer, the token lifespan. But now I find out all of the groups that Alex is a member of. So obviously, Alex is a member of quite a few groups already. So there's a big chunk of my token now taken up with Alex's group. There's that login. There's that login hint, which is pretty useful. An IP address, which may or may not be useful. And then I've got things like the standard claims. Oh, and by the way, down here we can see with the WIDS claim, that's our directory roles that have been assigned to Alex, and I can see because the nature of this particular ID that Alex is just a regular user in this tenant. He has no admin privileges or no special roles assigned to him at all, and I can make my decisions based on that. So that's a pretty easy way to just get additional information into the token. Now, one of the problems here, though, is I sure have a lot of groups. And the issue here is if Alex becomes a member of too many groups, my token will just get too big. So the problem is we can't fit all of the groups that Alex is a member of, especially if you pick that all groups choice that we did before, into this token, because it will just get too big, right? And we have to live within the boundaries of, for example, implicit flow and putting it on a redirect URL and so on. So we limit how many groups you can find in this token to, in the case of a JOT token like this one, 200. So if Alex is a member of 201 groups or more, you won't get any groups in the token. You'll get what we call a group overage claim instead. And you'll be expected, if you actually want to know what groups Alex is a member of, to go and call Microsoft Graph to figure it out. Because we can't put too many groups, and that too many is 201 groups into a token. Now, if you've implemented an application that's using implicit flow and getting your ID token that way, the limit is even smaller. It's 6. So if Alex is a member of 7 groups, and clearly he's a member of more than 7 here, I won't get the groups in the token again. Again, I'll get a token overage claim instead. So while groups are pretty easy to add to my token, they can be a little bit less useful as a developer because, well, I'm stuck with I won't know if I actually can get all of this user's groups in or not. So let's sign out of the case here and go back to our configuration, and let's delete the groups claim here. And so one option to try to avoid getting into a group overage claim situation, so I'll go back to my adding the groups. I'm going to, instead of picking one of these, I'm going to pick groups assigned to the application. I can still pick something like directory roles here as well. Maybe I still want to know whether or not Alex is a group administrator, for example. But I can say I only want groups that are assigned to this application. What this is going to do is, instead of saying, well, Alex is a member of 1,000 groups, so you can't know them, we're only going to put the group claim in the token if the group is assigned to the application. So let's go ahead and add that configuration for us. So now we're going to get groups, but only groups assigned to the application. So let's go over to an IT admin here and go to our enterprise apps, our applications blade, and here are enterprise apps. And here we'll find the same application, hopefully. There we go. So this is the enterprise app or service principal. This is where IT folks go to manage how this application works in this particular tenant. Now, this is, of course, where an IT pro would say, well, here are the users or groups that I want to assign to this application. So, for example, I could come here as an IT pro, and I could say that assignment is required. Oh, that's not working. So here I have an option of turning this on, assignment required. And if I do, it means nobody gets to use this app unless they're actually pre-assigned to the application. So that's not really token customization. I don't have to talk to the developer about this. If I say I'm assigning this, I require assignment, and only these 5 individuals get to use this app, when the application goes to authenticate a user, it won't get the token back unless it's one of those particular 5 users. So I can do that without talking to the developer. So here I'll go ahead and go to my users and groups. And here we can see that I have no groups assigned to this, but both Kyle and Alex have used the app. So let's go ahead and add a group. Now, in order to have group, I do have to have P1 licensing or better. I have to have a paid for license with Azure AD. So a free tier tenant can't do this, can't assign groups. But we'll go ahead and assign this group and the approvers and the blue group, and we'll go ahead and assign those groups to the application. So now we've assigned a couple of groups, and if either of these, if the user is a member of either of these groups, their ID will show up, or the group ID will show up as a claim in our token. So let's see if we can do that. This sometimes takes a moment or two for syncing because as we do our replication, but let's give this a try. We might have to sign in again. So let's go ahead and sign in as Alex. And last time we had, our first customization where we took out all the groups is clearly working because it's the group claims are all gone here. Let's sign out again and try again. And again, this is a replication. It can take a few minutes before groups show up, which is what's happening here. So I'm gonna let's wait for a second, and I'll come back and actually I should check. Come to think of it, is Alex a member of either of these? And there are no members here, so let's add Alex as a member. And Did I do that right? Okay, so we got Alex added as a member. Let's go back to our application again, and we'll sign in Alex. And sure enough, there's our group ID. I'm guessing that's for approvers. So now Alex has been added to the approvers group. Right, so this is so now we see that I'm probably not gonna hit my 201 limit here. It's still possible to hit the 201 limit, so I do have to be aware of that. So I still may get a group overage claim, but I've lowered the probability quite a bit. The other thing to note here is that Alex has to be a member of the group at a top level. Nested groups are not supported. So if I wanted to make sure that this particular group claim was here, Alex can't be here because he's a member of a nested group. He has to be here at the top level. So that can impact whether or not the check you're doing based on group membership is really working or not. So let's take a quick look. Let's go back to our slides here. Let's see if I have any questions here. So Bogdan's already put a sample up of the drop. Does PIM impact which roles are provided in the claim? Yes, certainly when we look at that WIDS claim, the PIM, if I go ahead and elevate a user for a few minutes or a few hours, then their PIM claim will be different based on what it is at the time the token is issued. But tokens are not kept up to date by themselves. So until the life of that token, the token will see what the WIDS claim would have been at the time that the token was issued to the application. Can I speak to how a feature flag would be incorporated into a token? I will be getting to what you might be able to do in that space a little later, so let's hold off for a minute. What rights are required to add assigned users group to an application programmatically? As far as the rights that would be, it depends on how the tenant is configured. Wide open, if the tenant is just out of the box, no changes has been made, then anyone could change what's in an application registration, either programmatically or in the UI. That can be turned off, and users are not allowed to do application registrations, in which case you would need to be an owner of the app, or you could have the application admin, the cloud app admin, or the app developer roles that would allow you to manipulate application registrations. Programmatically or online, it doesn't really make any difference. It's all the same with respect to that. Okay, so let's go back to the slides for a minute. Any other questions while I'm here? We'll see how we're doing against getting the slides. Okay, we did that. Again, group overage claims, right? So these are pretty severe limits. They're quite small, especially when you think about using a hybrid, the implicit flow, which will impact, say, an application built on ASP.NET Core, because they use hybrid by default. So if you are looking at that scenario, this is a problem. The group overage claim is a bit of a problem here. So let's go and take a look at what the group overage claim looks like. So here you can see when I look at the token and I look at the claims in the token, I can see that the groups claim is not here, right? There is no groups claim here. So instead, as a developer, I'd have to look and say, well, I'm looking for groups claim. It's not here. Instead, my code has to go look for underscore claim underscore names claim. And in that claim, I have to find the groups entry. And if that's there, I now know that this token has found a group overage claim. So here you can see that we also provide this underscore claim underscore sources of endpoint. This is the Microsoft Graph. It should be the Microsoft Graph endpoint that I would call in order to actually go ahead and find out the group membership. Unfortunately, this is not a Microsoft Graph endpoint. It's an Azure Active Directory Graph endpoint, and you can't use it anymore We have 15 days left. So that's we don't actually want you to use this. But really, once you know that it's a group overage claim, you already know what the query you need to call to Microsoft Graph is. So while it is here, it's not a particularly useful bit of information. But I do need to go ahead and make that check for the group overage claim. So if I have implicit flow, it's a different format. It's not an underscore claim, underscore names claim. It's actually a has groups claim. So if there's a claim, there's no groups claim, but instead there's a has groups claim with a value of true, then you can then go ahead and assume that you have to call Microsoft Graph. And in this case, we don't give you the query. You have to know the query ahead of time. I don't expect us that we're going to change the link that we're finding, because we don't want to break other applications. So there is an issue there. Let's see, what token is required to make the call to group call to graph? The permission you need in your token is simply user.read. So I can find out what groups the user is a member of just with user.read. And we're going to take a look at that in just a second. Is the ID token sufficient? Well, the ID token will, if you're looking to find out which groups the user is in a claim, oh, I see. If you have an ID token and then you need to call Microsoft Graph, no. You can't call Microsoft Graph with an ID token. You have to ask for user.read and get an access token as well. So if you are going to use groups in a claim, and we need you to fall back to Microsoft Graph to make that, so you're going to need user.read in order to make that call. You can't use an ID token to call Microsoft Graph. Okay, so what do you have to do in your code? You have to find out if there's an underscore claim, underscore names claim, and it has the group as a value. That means I'm in an overage situation, or maybe it has the has groups. If either one of those two are in place, I have to call Microsoft Graph, and here's the call I would use to replicate the give me all groups that this user is a member of, and that would include nested groups as well, and this can be done with a user.read permission, but it does require an access token. Can't make this call with an ID token. And if that's not the case, I can find out if there's a groups claim. Now, if there is no group there's no groups claim, and there's no underscore claim, underscore names claim, and there's no has groups claim, it just means the user is not in any groups. So the lack of the groups claim by itself doesn't tell you you're in an overage situation. Instead, it may be an indication that this user is a member of no groups, which means they probably joined the company 15 minutes ago. Okay, so another way to avoid this, we looked at one way, which is to go ahead and use groups that are assigned to the application. And that does work, but it's still possible to get into an overage situation. Another way to do it is to say, well, as a developer, I don't really want all the different group information. I have some various capabilities in my application, and I want to be able to assign users or groups to that capability. So instead of dealing with groups and group IDs and having to have some kind of map between the group ID and my application's capability, instead, I'm going to define roles for my application. So I go to my application registration here, and I go to my app roles. And now we're going to define app roles that can have users or groups assigned to them. So I don't have to have this map in my code that says this ID group means approver, or this ID group means admin. Instead, I can just look for a role claim with that name spelled out. And the name we're going to have spelled out is what we put here in our application registration. So in this case, we'll create a role for approver. And the key here is I want this role to be allowed to have members of the types of users or groups. So this says I'm creating an application role for my application, and the entities I expect to be assigned to this role are users and groups. If I had an API and I was defining an API, so in other words, an access token here, I could have an application, say a allowed member type, meaning this is really an application permission that I'm defining, so an application can be assigned this role. Right now, we're just going to do users and groups. Now, the value I want to look for in the token will also be approver, and this is how I explain to the IT admins what exactly they're allowing this user to do when they assign this user a role. So here we have, so this user can now approve an item. So great, I've assigned effectively an elevated role here. Now here's a word of caution, if you will. I cannot just create elevated roles. Because if the IT pro comes back and say, you must be assigned to use this app, when they assign a user or a group to the app, they have to give a role as well, because I've defined roles here. So if all I have is approver, then the only thing the IT pros can assign is everybody gets to be an approver, which is probably not what I'm really looking for here. Instead, I have to, as an application developer, define my baseline. So I'll define a standard user role. I guess you could use a different name, but basically, this just gives the opportunity for my IT pro to assign a non-elevated role to when they need to assign users or groups to this app. So whenever you're creating app roles that are assigned to users and groups, make sure that you assign a baseline as well as any elevated roles, because those are going to be needed when I go back to my IT Pro here. And let's go back to our best practices app, and let's do a refresh here. And in this case, let's go ahead and assign Alex. Let's specifically assign Alex here. So I'll edit my assignment, and now I can see that I've got these app roles that have been created in my application registration. So I'll go ahead and specifically assign Alex the role of user, because Alex is just a regular user. But for my approvers group here, let's go ahead here and edit the assignment for approvers to say, well, I've got a group for approvers, and maybe that group goes across many applications. And I want to specifically support that group being approvers in my app, then the IT Pro can come in, assign the group to the application, and now I can see that anyone in the approvers group will be get the approver role, and Alex themselves is a regular user. Okay, so let's go back and sign in. Again, we may look at a replication time frame here, but let's go ahead and sign in. And here we can see that we get the group membership still. There's Alex's approver group membership. And Alex is assigned the role of user, just like we assigned to him. And he's assigned the role of approver because he's a member of the approvers group, and that group is assigned to our approver role. So as a developer, I have to be aware that the roles claim will have many values, even if I'm only looking for one, because it's an array. And secondly, of course, I may not have any roles at all. Right, so if I signed in as Kyle, there wouldn't be an assigned role here because he hasn't been assigned any actual role in that UI. Again, as a developer, you have to be aware that there may not be a roles claim, even though I'm asking for it. At which point you would probably fall back to whatever that baseline user role you defined would be what someone would get if they also didn't have an assigned role. Right, so you have to be aware when you're making up app roles that can be assigned to users and groups, that the role claim may not be present. Let's go back to our slides, and let's see how I'm doing against the slides. This is what the token looks like, both with a groups array and a roles array. If I looked at the JSON, as I was just mentioning that MSOL takes the JSON away for me, I can just enumerate all the claims in the token, and if there are claims in an array, it just goes ahead and breaks them up for me. Now, one question I have about all of this is, should we really be customizing tokens at all? Right? I kind of have some problems with tokens. The first one is A token is valid until it expires, which means I don't get another token until it expires. So if I am customizing my ID token that I am doing here, well, the token could be out of date for up to an hour, right? Because my ID tokens are issued for an hour lifespan by default. They're issued for whatever time we issue them for. By default, they're about an hour. They are an hour today. And if I'm actually looking for information in an access token, then that could be out of date for up to 28 hours. Because at some point in time, we don't have this today, but at some point in time, we're going to find a way to enable your own custom APIs to be able to be protected by continuous access evaluation. And if you had an application that was protected by continuous access evaluation and an API that used continuous access evaluation, the tokens issued can be up to 28 hours in length, because we can revoke access to the resource outside of the token lifespan. It's a great feature. It also means the token is going to get a little old, right? So if I am making a decision, well, that thing could be stale. The same thing with groups. Of course, if I want to do groups in my token, it's almost impossible to really get the answer I need. I have no idea how many groups a user is a member of before they sign in, or even after for that member. So I really have to call Microsoft Graph to really get an accurate representation of the groups the user is a member of. And if I did ask for all the groups the user is a member of, most of them I don't really care about, right? I only have a few different roles in my application. And of course, if I do use groups in my token, I have to have some mapping between what the group ID is and what that means in my application. So there's a whole nother bunch of code and probably some UI and some APIs I have to enable for my application. Now, if I call Microsoft Graph, then I don't have any of these issues, right? I can simply call Microsoft Graph, get all of this information instead, and live with that. Now, if I'm an ISV building in a purely standards-based way, sure, maybe I still want to do the token. But if I'm building a line of business application, especially that's built on top of the Microsoft Identity Platform, then I'm probably better off just using Microsoft Graph instead. So I've actually got this. So let's go ahead here and we'll sign in Alex again. Now notice I've actually got this check mark on that says to evaluate my access with Microsoft Graph. So I can see, because I've called Microsoft Graph, the two roles. I haven't looked at the definition here, but I've got the two roles that are here. That's just a bug. I should usually have the right name there. And I can see the group membership that Alex has. And here I can see that he's a member of these particular groups, as well as having these particular roles assigned. So he's not any of these roles, but he is a member of all of these different groups. And I can see some indication of that back here in my ID token, right? So for example, here I've got my WIDS claim, and sure enough, Alex is a regular user. Now, in this particular app, only group admins can use this group's functionality. So since Alex is not a group admin, and we can see this on our groups tab, right? Group admin, nope. He can't see, this button is not enabled. Okay, well, let's fix that. Let's go over to our tenant here. We'll go into Alex as a user. And this is where this responsiveness to PIM really does come into play here. So let's go ahead and assign Alex the role of group admin, right? So he's a group administrator. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it an active assignment. I could make it eligible and use PIM in a more normal way, but let me go ahead here and make it an active one. But I'm not going to make it permanently assigned. Instead, I'm going to make it temporarily assigned. So let's do it for today. And I have to have at least a 5-minute time frame here. So let's go for 9:50, I guess. 9:43. Yeah, let's make it 9:49. And now Alex will be an admin, a group's admin, for 5 minutes, 5-6 minutes. That's kind of the minimum time here. Okay, so let's go back to our application. And And now what this application is doing is it's calling Microsoft Graph in a batch process. So here you can see that the last time it called was at 9:44 and 27. So we kind of have to wait halfway through the 9:45 minute before we'll see that this changes. But the thing is, this will change within that time frame, because in the code, what we're doing is we're doing a Microsoft Graph batch request to get information about the user. Have they signed out? They've been deleted or disabled? Have they changed their password lately? Are they still assigned the roles? What role have they been assigned? If they've been assigned, and we're checking their group membership. So we use this batch of 4 requests to we make 4 requests to Microsoft Graph in a batch, and it tells us all of the information we're literally looking for. So now that we're halfway through 9:45, we see that Alex is in fact a group admin. The functionality has been turned on in my application. And if I go back to my ID tokens, I say, oh, nope, Alex is not a group admin. Alex can't do this capability. But if I use Microsoft Graph instead, I'm up to the moment with respect to when I do the check as to whether or not Alex should be allowed access to this all-important groups button. So we do have a hand up. Eunice? Okay.
I actually dumped the text in the chat because it's a doozy, and I apologize for blindsiding you. Can you touch a little bit on how the token configuration differs from continuous access evaluation and session management? I've been discouraging customers from tampering with token lifetimes for the obvious reasons, and redirecting them over the conditional access and like session aware type configurations, but it adds so much complexity to how developers think about stuff. I'm not sure if that's the best path forward either.
No, actually, CAE does not add very much complexity to a developer at all. I don't have a lot of time here, but if I use something like MSOL, all I need to do is when I create my application, I simply say I support CAE, which is way up here with my, I have it as an option here. So I have one additional MSOL call to make with client capabilities of CP1, which clearly means CAE. Not sure why we use CP1, but that's what we do. And then when I make a call to my API, I just have to handle the fact that when I get a failure code, I'll get this claims challenge passed back. So I get a claims challenge parameter return in the authorization header. And it's really, this code is all you need. And I'm fully compliant with continuous access evaluation. So it's not a big amount of work on the developer side to support CAE. And I strongly encourage it, as long as your application fits the right profile, like you're calling Graph on a regular basis, then continuous access evaluation is not a very big amount of work for the developer. I do need to move on because we're kind of, I'm taking too much time here. Let me move on to the next section. Let's talk about custom claim providers. So the nice thing is this allows a token to have data that's not from Azure AD. In other words, things you can't get from Microsoft Graph. So in this case, we actually do have a real reason to have a token, because the information in the token is not going to be accessible from a call to Microsoft Graph that I could just make. So in this case, we'll go through our custom claim provider. So we've started a new capability within Azure AD itself called custom authentication extensions. And the idea here is that you'll be able to extend our authentication experiences, or capabilities in this case, with these custom extensions. Now, the only custom extension we have today is the custom extension to add a custom claim, but we have a framework here where we will be able to add additional events later. So what happens here is during the authentication process, in this case, just as a token is being issued, we can see if there's a event listener registered. In other words, hey, somebody's waiting for the token issuing's events. And if that's the case, we'll go off and call to your own API. This could be provided by an ISV. It could be provided by yourself as a line of business developers. But we're going to call to your API your API in this case is going to have the ability to inject additional claims, right, from whatever system you have. You can make them up. It could be hard-coded. They could be a database query, whatever it is that you do in order to determine what the right information that needs to be in that token is. And then you send those claims back to us and we bundle them into your token. So it's a great scheme here to enable a different kind of application or set of tokens, information in my token that doesn't come from Azure AD at all. So let's go ahead and see this at work. And while I look at this, let's see, we have a question. So yes, so the question, the mention here is that the one benefit is I can see tokens that are only relevant to my application. Absolutely. If you look at the code in the best practices app, you'll see that actually what I'm doing here is, and that's why there's a little bit of a loop here. If I look at how I build the access evaluation here, notice the first three are just standard queries, right? They're just, what roles has been assigned to this service principal. The next one actually goes through the list of groups I'm interested in, right? So what this particular app will do is if I was interested in a different group, I could add it to this list, and we're only checking this list for membership, right? So I only care if this particular user has gotten one of these roles, these 4 roles, or as a member of one of these 3 groups. I'm not checking the entirety of their membership. I'm only checking for that one, these specific groups. And I do that because as I build the query here for this role, I'm building this particular check member objects API in Microsoft Graph. In its body, it takes a JSON list of roles or groups that I'm looking for, and those are the only ones that are being checked. So yes, I can very specifically say, and this is nice because I don't have to have my mapping, if you will, is just here. So it makes things a little simpler, but you can certainly replicate that capability. So let's go back to our custom claim here. So here I am on an enterprise app, and I go to the single sign-on blade. This is where you'll find our new claims issuance policy editor. So here and on my OpenID Connect app or OAuth2 app, I have my attributes and claims entry, which I can come here and edit. And this lets me define within this that I want to use a custom claims provider. And in this case, it's coming off the token issuance. So when a token is being issued, I want you to go ahead and call this API, my custom claim provider API, and it's going to make available some additional claims. So this is how I edit it this is remember, this is very tenant specific. So it hangs off the enterprise app or service principal blade. And in this case, I'm using this editor to say, I want to use a custom claims provider, which is detailed down here. And the claims I want are the custom role, and the date of birth. There's another couple of claims that this provider has here, down here, API version and correlation ID. Not really interested in those, but I'd like to see their custom roles and also the date of birth. And in fact, I can look at these claims and do additional manipulation on them if I wanted to. I can do transformations, etc. So I have a full range of capability of customizing the claims in these tokens on a customer by customer or enterprise app by enterprise app basis. So having done that, I can go ahead to my custom claim provider test. Nope. This is so I'm running this out of an Azure function. Let's see if I get any of these right. Nope, not that one either. There we go. Here's the actual app. So this app is just registered. Oops, let's see. I've done everything except, oh, sorry, there it is. Custom claims on my token test. And here I'm calling to that API. That particular application is registered to go as its redirect URI back to jwt.ms, so I can just look at the token. And here you can see that this particular token has some things that are not in our documented token claims. I have my date of birth claim, which In this case, I'm just making up in the code, and I can even return an array of claims as well, or a claim array with my custom roles. So this is showing that I'm calling off into this Azure function. Doesn't have to be an Azure function, but that's what I've implemented. And now I can augment my token with claims that don't come from Azure AD. So if that's the need I have, it can be very powerful to use these custom claim provider capabilities. We have a question. If an app needs to query graph on requests, this really moves authorization away from access tokens to external API. Is this case graph correct? So it depends on what we're looking for. I'm not changing graph's authorization. I'm using graph to provide some authorization for my particular application. Now I could do this, of course, in an API if I wanted to, but this is done for my particular application, and I'm doing this authorization simply to have the information that drives the token issuance queried in a more timely manner, right? So for example, I get an ID token, it's good for an hour. I shouldn't go back and ask for another ID token every 15 minutes because at that point the token was issued for an hour, the spec says we should use it for an hour. But if I feel like calling Microsoft Grasp because I want to check group membership, at the same time I can use a batch to find out, hey, was this user no longer assigned to the app? So it gives me an opportunity to move, because it's outside of the boundary of the standards, if you will. The standards are, hey, we do everything based on tokens. We have a Microsoft Graph API that lets me learn more about my application, how it's configured, and how it's configured to run in any particular tenant. Therefore, I can use that information to tighten up that authorization. It's not required, but it's certainly something I can do if I felt like it. So the Azure AD custom claim provider. We have a very nice walkthrough here. I think we've got it here. So here's a nice overview. They've got, as you can see, videos and the code I'm running. This custom claim provider I have is straight out of their walkthrough here. Right, so they got this step-by-step setup for you to get a sample up and running. That's all I did. I just went through, and you can see even the names I think are the same in here. So all of the steps to get a custom claim provider running are right here in this package, and it's all I'm doing in this particular tenant. So that's the end of the prepared content. As you can see, we've made a bunch of changes recently in token customization, right? We've added that token issuance policy with a nice editor. We've added custom claim providers as well, right? So both of those are big things that you can use if you really want to customize the token that you use in your application. Any other questions or comments? We've got a whole minute and a half left.
I wanted to say really quick, I've done a lot of this stuff just recently for a client. And one thing that wasn't clear to me at first, that in case it's not clear to everybody, is that if you want to customize any of the claims in an access token, you have to go to that registration of that API, not the application. I know you said it at the beginning, but I need to emphasize that because that was something I found kind of tricky.
Yeah, one of my golden rules of tokens is never mess with someone else's token. You don't own the access token unless you implement the API. If you implement the API, you get to customize that token. If you don't get to touch it. Let's see, we have a question. I've already implemented the process to access our LDAP, but I faced an issue where if the data was not returned within 1 or 2 seconds, it caused a problem with a data provider that was not used. Is there any way to monitor the situation? Are there any other important consideration or pitfalls to be aware of? I mean, clearly you've hit the biggest one, right? If there's anything about Azure AD, I guess, with respect to this scenario, is boy, are we in a hurry. We do billions and billions and billions of authentications a day, and we really just don't feel the time to be able to wait for your response. And that's a very tricky thing because, hey, if you're going to take whatever the term too long is, then the next thing you know is, hey, we're going to have a problem here because it's taking too long. Unfortunately, there's no real good answer here. You unfortunately just have to be as performant as possible. And of course, there's very little you can do if it's how long does the query take to get back from my LDAP. Caching, I guess. I don't know what a good approach would be there, but it is going to be an issue. We need to be, these custom claim providers need to be very performant. Eunice, I don't know what you mean by tell it to FSIs, but
it was just a tongue-in-cheek comment of don't mess with other people's access tokens. Can we record that and like play it back to FSIs?
I tell it to people all the time. I think Bogdan might have heard me say it to people in the past. Richard, you have your hand up.
I'm just was wondering about, I know we don't have any time left, but verifiable credentials in Microsoft Entra.
So it's a big topic for us, a huge capability. It doesn't come into play in this particular scenario because verified credentials can be put in through anywhere, but they don't have any specific part of this topic. But I'm sure Nandeesh would like to hear about anything you'd like to know about verifiable credentials, and maybe we can queue up that part of the conversation up for another community call in the future.
I would just appreciate, talk, a discussion, a community of in regard to verifiable credentials in Web3. That's all.
Okay. Thanks for the suggestion. Okay, well, now we're over time, but thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time. Enjoy the rest of your day, whatever that might be. And thanks a lot. We really appreciate it.